Picture this. A quiet art student carefully organizing her sketchbooks when three popular girls decide to teach her a lesson by slamming her locker door on her fingers with brutal force. What they didn't know was that this shy girl had been secretly mastering Taekwondo since she was 6 years old, under her grandmother's expert guidance. What happened next left the bullies sobbing on the floor and became the most talked about incident in Cedar Falls history. If you're ready for the most incredible story of justice you'll ever witness, you're in exactly the right place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn morning mist hung low over Riverside Valley High School as Lily Chen stepped carefully from her mother's silver Honda Accord, clutching her worn leather art portfolio against her chest. At 16, Lily had perfected the delicate art of moving through her world like a whisper, unnoticed and unbothered. Her straight black hair fell like a curtain around her face, and she preferred oversized cardigans and dark jeans that helped her blend seamlessly into any crowd. While her classmates measured their worth in social media likes and weekend party invitations, Lily found solace in her sketchbooks and the quiet corners of the school where she could capture the world through her artistic lens. Cedar Falls, Oregon was one of those picturesque small cities where everyone believed they knew everyone else's story. But when it came to Lily Chen, most people only saw the surface. Her teachers knew her as the dedicated student who always sat in the second row, turned in pristine assignments, and never caused disruption. Her classmates saw her as the quiet Asian girl who carried art supplies everywhere and rarely spoke unless directly addressed. What none of them realized was that every evening after school, Lily transformed into something entirely different at the Golden Dragon Martial Arts Studio, where she had been training in Taekwondo under her grandmother's watchful eye for the past decade. Mei Chen, Lily's 72-year-old grandmother, had been a Taekwondo master in South Korea before immigrating to America in the 1980s. She had opened a small studio in Portland and spent decades teaching women and children how to defend themselves with dignity and precision. When Lily's family moved to Cedar Falls 2 years ago so her father could take a position with a growing tech company, Mei had relocated as well, unable to bear the thought of being separated from her granddaughter. Together, they had converted the garage behind the Chen family home into a private training space where Lily continued to hone skills that would have amazed her classmates. The Chen family had worked deliberately to maintain a low profile in their new community. Dr. Sarah Chen, Lily's mother, was slowly building her pediatric practice at Cedar Falls Medical Center, while Michael Chen was establishing himself as a valuable software engineer at Northwest Digital Solutions. They had learned from previous moves that being different, being skilled, being anything that drew attention could make life difficult for their daughter. So they encouraged Lily's natural inclination toward invisibility, allowing her to pursue her artistic passions while secretly maintaining the martial arts training that had become as natural to her as breathing. Lily navigated through the crowded main entrance of Riverside Valley High, weaving between clusters of students who were sharing weekend stories and cramming for first-period exams. The hallways carried the familiar scent of industrial floor cleaner, mixed with teenage energy and morning coffee from the nearby teacher's lounge. She moved with unconscious grace toward the science wing where her locker was located, her mind already focused on the watercolor landscape she planned to work on during lunch break. That's when she first noticed Madison Torres holding court in the center of the main corridor, surrounded by her usual entourage of admirers and followers. Madison was everything Lily deliberately chose not to be: loud, commanding, and absolutely comfortable being the center of attention at all times. At 17, Madison had inherited her mother's sharp features and her father's sense of entitlement, creating a combination that made her both beautiful and dangerous. As captain of the varsity volleyball team and daughter of school board member Patricia Torres, Madison wielded influence that extended far beyond typical high school hierarchies. Madison's inner circle consisted of Brooklyn Walsh and Hazel Kim, two girls who had attached themselves to Madison's rising star and never questioned her judgment. Brooklyn came from old Cedar Falls money, the kind of family that had their name on buildings downtown and expected their children to maintain certain social standards. Her parents' generous donations to the school's athletics program meant that Brooklyn enjoyed the same protection that wealth and influence typically provided. Hazel was newer to the group, having earned her place through absolute loyalty and willingness to do whatever Madison required without hesitation. Together, the three girls formed an unofficial ruling class at Riverside Valley High, determining who was worthy of attention and who deserved to be ignored or worse. They had spent their high school careers building a reputation for being untouchable, protected by their families' connections, and their own carefully cultivated image as model students and athletes. Teachers praised their academic achievements, coaches celebrated their athletic accomplishments, and administrators valued their families' financial support. Lily had successfully avoided their attention for nearly 2 full years by being utterly unremarkable in their eyes. She kept her grades high but not exceptional enough to draw notice, participated in art club, but avoided any leadership roles and made sure her creative achievements stayed within the safe boundaries of the art department. Her strategy had worked perfectly until this particular Tuesday morning when Madison's attention shifted toward her for reasons Lily couldn't immediately understand. As Lily approached locker 247, she became aware of Madison's voice cutting through the morning conversation like a blade through silk. There was something different in Madison's tone today, something calculated and predatory that made Lily's trained instincts send subtle warning signals through her nervous system. She had learned from her grandmother to trust these feelings, to recognize when someone was sizing up potential prey rather than simply making casual conversation. Lily reached her locker and began entering her combination with steady, practiced movements, drawing on years of mental discipline training to remain calm despite the growing sense of unease. Her peripheral vision tracked Madison and her friends as they moved closer, their conversation becoming more focused and intentional. Other students seemed to sense the shift in energy, some slowing their pace to observe what might unfold, others hurrying past to avoid becoming involved in whatever was about to happen. The hallway was filling with students heading to first period, but Lily noticed how quickly space seemed to clear around Madison's group as they approached. There was an invisible buffer zone that formed around them, created by other students' unconscious recognition of potential danger. Some kids pulled out their phones, sensing that something worth recording might be about to occur, while others deliberately looked away, not wanting to witness whatever Madison had planned. Lily's fingers worked her locker combination with automatic precision while her mind cataloged escape routes and assessed potential threats, skills her grandmother had taught her were essential for surviving in any environment where predators might be present. Madison's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her designer backpack as she studied Lily with the calculating gaze of someone who had just discovered an interesting new project. The morning sunlight, streaming through the tall windows of Riverside Valley High, cast sharp angles across Madison's face, highlighting the cruel smile that was beginning to form at the corners of her mouth. She had been queen of this particular kingdom for 3 years now, and maintaining that position required constant vigilance and occasional reminders to the student body about the natural order of things. Brooklyn Wall shifted her weight from one expensive sneaker to the other, her blonde hair catching the light as she tilted her head in that particular way that meant she was waiting for Madison's signal. Brooklyn had learned early in their friendship that Madison's ideas were always worth following, especially when they involved putting someone in their proper place. Her family's prominence in Cedar Falls society had taught her that some people were simply born to lead while others were meant to follow, and she had never questioned which category she belonged to. Hazel Kim stood slightly behind the other two, her dark eyes fixed on Lily with an intensity that suggested she was already anticipating whatever entertainment Madison had planned. Hazel's loyalty to Madison bordered on worship, partly because Madison had rescued her from social obscurity during freshman year, and partly because she genuinely enjoyed watching Madison exercise her power over others. There was something deeply satisfying about being on the winning side of these encounters, about being protected by Madison's influence rather than targeted by it. The dynamic between the three girls had been carefully cultivated over years of shared experiences and mutual benefit. Madison provided the vision and leadership, Brooklyn brought family connections and financial resources, while Hazel offered unwavering support and willingness to handle the messier aspects of maintaining their social position. They moved through the school like a well-coordinated unit, each understanding their role and responsibilities within the group's hierarchy. Lily continued organizing her art supplies in her locker, her movements deliberate and unhurried, despite the growing awareness that she had somehow attracted unwanted attention. Her watercolor set was arranged precisely in the top compartment, while her sketchbooks were stacked neatly on the bottom shelf. Years of training with her grandmother had taught her the importance of maintaining composure under pressure, of never revealing fear or uncertainty to potential adversaries. Every gesture remained calm and purposeful, giving no indication of the alertness that was building within her trained mind. The Chen family's decision to keep Lily's martial arts background private had been made after careful consideration of their previous experiences. In their last town, Lily's abilities had become known after she helped stop a playground incident, and the attention that followed had made their lives complicated in ways they hadn't anticipated. Parents had begun treating her differently, teachers had started watching her with suspicion, and other children had either challenged her constantly or avoided her entirely. The family had learned that being different, even in positive ways, often carried unexpected costs. Dr. Sarah Chen had been particularly adamant about maintaining Lily's privacy regarding her training. As a pediatrician, she had seen too many children struggle with the burden of being labeled as different or exceptional. She wanted her daughter to have the opportunity to develop friendships and relationships based on her personality and interests rather than her unusual skills. The family had agreed that Lily's training would remain a private matter, something that belonged to her relationship with her grandmother and had no place in her school life. Michael Chen had supported his wife's position, though for slightly different reasons. His experience in the tech industry had taught him that standing out could be as much a liability as an asset, particularly when you were trying to establish yourself in a new community. He wanted his family to be seen as normal, reliable neighbors, rather than as an exotic addition to Cedar Falls society. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The decision to keep Lily's abilities private had seemed like the safest path forward for everyone involved. Mei Chen had been the most conflicted about the secrecy surrounding Lily's training. As a former instructor who had spent decades teaching women to defend themselves with pride and confidence, she understood the power that came from others, knowing you could protect yourself. But she also recognized the wisdom in her son and daughter-in-law's concerns, particularly given the cultural complexities of being an Asian family in a predominantly white community. She had agreed to support their decision while privately hoping that Lily would never be placed in a situation where her hidden abilities might be needed. The training sessions in the converted garage had become a sacred space where Lily could fully express the confident, powerful person she was learning to become under her grandmother's guidance. There, surrounded by traditional Korean artwork and the subtle scent of jasmine tea, Lily transformed from the quiet art student into a focused martial artist who could execute techniques with precision and power that would have surprised anyone who knew her only from school. These evening sessions had become the foundation of her identity, even though that identity remained hidden from the rest of her world. Lily's artistic talents had provided the perfect cover for her true interests and abilities. Her teachers and classmates saw her as a creative, introspective student whose quiet nature made perfect sense given her obvious passion for visual arts. Her portfolio was filled with detailed drawings and paintings that demonstrated genuine skill and dedication, making her reputation as an artist both authentic and useful for maintaining her low profile. The art supplies she carried everywhere served as both legitimate tools for her creative work and effective camouflage for her more complex identity. The contradiction between Lily's public and private selves had become increasingly natural over the 2 years since moving to Cedar Falls. At school, she moved with the careful restraint of someone who had learned to minimize her presence and avoid drawing attention. But in her grandmother's garage, she moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had mastered complex physical skills and understood her own capabilities. The transition between these two versions of herself had become as natural as changing clothes, though it sometimes left her feeling disconnected from both identities. Madison's voice cut through Lily's thoughts as she finally spoke, her tone carrying the kind of casual cruelty that came naturally to someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. The words were carefully chosen to sound almost friendly to any adults who might overhear, while carrying an unmistakable undertone of threat that Lily's trained instincts immediately recognized. This was the moment Lily had been unconsciously preparing for since the beginning of the school year, though she hadn't realized it until now. The hallway around them seemed to grow quieter as other students sensed the shift in energy and began paying closer attention to the interaction unfolding near Locker 247. Some moved closer, drawn by the possibility of witnessing drama, while others maintained their distance, instinctively understanding that they didn't want to become involved in whatever Madison Torres had planned for the quiet art student who had somehow caught her attention. Madison Torres had ruled Riverside Valley High with an iron fist wrapped in designer clothing for 3 years, and her reign had been built on a foundation of carefully calculated cruelty and strategic intimidation. Her power didn't come from physical strength or academic excellence, though she maintained respectable grades when it suited her purposes. Instead, Madison's influence flowed from her mother's position on the Cedar Falls school board and her father's successful law practice, which had made the Torres family one of the most politically connected in the entire district. This combination of family wealth and institutional access had created an environment where Madison's actions were rarely questioned and even more rarely punished. Patricia Torres, Madison's mother, had been elected to the school board 5 years earlier on a platform of academic excellence and fiscal responsibility. What the voters hadn't anticipated was how Patricia would use her position to ensure that her daughter's high school experience remained smooth and uninterrupted by the kind of disciplinary actions that might affect other students. Phone calls from Patricia Torres to Principal Jackson were taken seriously, and her suggestions about how certain situations should be handled carried weight that extended far beyond normal parental influence. Carlos Torres, Madison's father, had built his law practice by representing the kind of families who valued discretion and results over publicity. His client list included several school board members, the mayor of Cedar Falls, and numerous business owners who had learned to appreciate his ability to make problems disappear quietly and efficiently. The Torres family's annual donations to various school programs and activities had made them indispensable to administrators who were constantly struggling with budget constraints and competing demands for limited resources. This combination of political influence and financial leverage had created a protective bubble around Madison that extended to her closest friends as well. Brooklyn Walsh's family enjoyed similar protection through their long-standing prominence in Cedar Falls society and their generous contributions to local institutions. The Walsh name appeared on plaques throughout the school, and Brooklyn had grown up understanding that her family's legacy came with both privileges and expectations that she was determined to maintain. Hazel Kim's position in the group was more precarious, based entirely on her loyalty to Madison and her willingness to do whatever was necessary to maintain their friendship. Hazel's parents owned a successful restaurant in downtown Cedar Falls, but their immigrant background and relative newcomer status meant they lacked the deep community connections that protected the Torres and Walsh families. This vulnerability made Hazel even more determined to prove her worth to Madison, often by being the most enthusiastic participant in their various schemes and social experiments. Together, the 3 girls had spent years perfecting their system of social control within Riverside Valley High. They identified students who posed potential threats to their status, or who simply annoyed them for various reasons, then systematically undermined those individuals through gossip, social exclusion, and occasional direct confrontation. Their methods were sophisticated enough to avoid serious administrative attention, while being effective enough to maintain their reputation for being untouchable. Madison's particular genius lay in her ability to identify the precise pressure points that would cause maximum damage to her targets. She studied her classmates with the careful attention of a predator learning about potential prey, noting their insecurities, fears, and vulnerabilities. She understood intuitively that the most effective attacks were those that struck at a person's core identity or threatened something they valued deeply. This psychological sophistication made her bullying campaign far more devastating than simple physical intimidation could ever be. The incident with Lily Chen had been building for weeks, though Lily herself hadn't been aware of Madison's growing interest in her situation. Madison had noticed how Lily moved through the school like a ghost, never drawing attention to herself and never participating in the social dynamics that Madison found so entertaining. This deliberate invisibility had initially protected Lily from Madison's notice, but eventually it began to irritate Madison in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Part of Madison's frustration stemmed from her inability to categorize Lily according to the social hierarchy she had spent years constructing and maintaining. Lily wasn't competing for social status, wasn't trying to climb the ladder or challenge existing power structures. She simply existed outside the system entirely, which Madison found both puzzling and threatening. Students who didn't play by the established rules represented a form of chaos that Madison couldn't tolerate in her carefully ordered world. Madison had begun gathering intelligence about Lily several weeks earlier, tasking Brooklyn and Hazel with casual observation and information collection. They had discovered that Lily spent most of her free time in the art wing, that she ate lunch alone while working on various creative projects, and that she seemed to have only one close friend in Noah Rodriguez, a quiet junior who shared her interest in avoiding social drama. This isolation made Lily an appealing target, because there would be fewer people willing or able to defend her when Madison decided to act. The timing of Madison's attack had been carefully chosen to coincide with Spirit Week, when the school administration was focused on maintaining positive energy and avoiding any incidents that might disrupt the planned activities. Madison understood that administrators would be particularly motivated to resolve any conflicts quickly and quietly during this period, which meant they would be more likely to pressure both sides to accept responsibility, rather than conducting a thorough investigation of what actually happened. Madison's plan had been developing over several days, waiting for the right opportunity and circumstances to ensure maximum impact with minimum risk to herself. She had observed Lily's morning routine, noting the timing of her arrival and the route she took to her locker. Madison had also positioned Brooklyn and Hazel strategically to ensure they would have clear views of whatever transpired while maintaining plausible deniability about their involvement in planning the incident. The specific method Madison had chosen for attacking Lily reflected her understanding of how to inflict maximum humiliation while maintaining the appearance of an accident or misunderstanding. By targeting Lily's art supplies and equipment, Madison was striking directly at something she knew Lily valued deeply, while creating a situation that could potentially be dismissed as teenage carelessness rather than deliberate assault. The plan demonstrated Madison's sophisticated understanding of how to cause lasting damage while minimizing her own exposure to serious consequences. Brooklyn and Hazel had fallen into their assigned roles without question, each understanding their part in the performance that was about to unfold. Brooklyn would serve as the primary witness who could provide testimony supporting Madison's version of events, while Hazel would handle crowd control and ensure that other students maintained appropriate distance from the action. Their coordination reflected years of practice in executing similar operations against various targets throughout their high school careers. The approaching confrontation represented more than just another instance of high school bullying. For Madison, it was an assertion of her continued dominance over the social environment she had worked so hard to control. For Lily, though she didn't yet realize it, it would become the moment when her two carefully separated identities would finally collide in ways that would change everything about her carefully constructed invisible existence at Riverside Valley High. The first signs of Madison's campaign against Lily had been subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for them. It began with small disruptions to Lily's carefully maintained routine, tiny inconveniences that could easily be dismissed as coincidence or accident. Her art supplies would mysteriously disappear from the communal workspace in the art room, only to reappear in unexpected locations throughout the school. Her favorite corner table in the library, where she typically spent her study halls working on sketches, would suddenly be occupied by groups of chattering underclassmen who claimed they had reserved it first. Lily had initially attributed these incidents to the normal chaos of high school life, the kind of random mishaps that occurred when 1,500 students shared limited space and resources. She had adapted quietly, finding new places to work and developing backup plans for when her usual routines were disrupted. Her grandmother's training had taught her to be flexible and resourceful, qualities that served her well as she navigated these increasingly frequent obstacles to her daily activities. Noah Rodriguez had been the first to notice the pattern emerging around Lily's experiences. As her closest friend and someone who shared her preference for observing rather than participating in social drama, Noah had developed sharp instincts for detecting when someone was being deliberately targeted. He had watched similar campaigns unfold against other students over the years, and he recognized the methodical nature of what was happening to Lily, even when she remained oblivious to it herself. Noah's attempts to warn Lily about Madison's growing interest in her had been met with gentle skepticism. Lily couldn't understand why someone like Madison Torres would waste time and energy on someone as insignificant as herself. She had worked so hard to remain invisible and unremarkable that the idea of attracting negative attention from the school's most powerful social predator seemed impossible. Her faith in her own invisibility had become a form of protection that she was reluctant to abandon, even when evidence suggested it might no longer be effective. The escalation had been gradual but relentless, with each incident slightly more intrusive and disruptive than the last. Lily's locker had been covered with sticky notes bearing anonymous messages about her appearance and social status, carefully worded to avoid crossing into territory that might prompt administrative intervention. Her art projects had been tampered with in ways that required her to start over completely, weeks of work destroyed by strategically placed water damage or mysterious tears that appeared overnight. The psychological pressure had begun to affect Lily's performance in both her academic and artistic pursuits. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, checking and double-checking her belongings, and developing contingency plans for scenarios she had never previously considered. The stress was exhausting, and she could feel her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack under the sustained assault on her peace of mind. Madison's strategy of attacking Lily's artistic identity had been particularly effective because it struck at something Lily genuinely cared about and couldn't easily replace or defend. Unlike social relationships or material possessions, artistic work represented hours of concentrated effort and creative energy that couldn't be recovered once it was destroyed. Each ruined project felt like a personal violation, a theft of time and inspiration that left Lily feeling vulnerable and exposed in ways she hadn't experienced since beginning her training with her grandmother. The campaign had also begun to affect Lily's relationship with her teachers, particularly in the art department, where she had previously felt most comfortable and confident. Miss Stevens, the art teacher who had become something of a mentor to Lily, had started asking questions about why so many of Lily's projects seemed to suffer from mysterious accidents and setbacks. The scrutiny was well-intentioned, but it added another layer of stress to Lily's already complicated situation as she struggled to explain events she didn't fully understand herself. Lily's parents had remained unaware of the escalating situation at school because Lily had become expert at hiding her stress and maintaining the appearance of normalcy at home. Dr. Sarah Chen was dealing with the demands of building her medical practice, while Michael Chen was focused on a major project at work that required long hours and frequent travel. Neither parent had noticed the subtle changes in their daughter's behavior or the increasing amount of time she spent in her room rather than working on art projects in the family's common areas. Even Mei Chen, despite her years of experience training students to recognize and respond to threats, had missed the signs of her granddaughter's growing distress. Lily had become skilled at compartmentalizing her experiences, using their training sessions as an escape from the problems at school rather than as an opportunity to discuss potential solutions. The physical discipline and mental focus required for Taekwondo practice provided temporary relief from the psychological pressure she was experiencing, but it also prevented her from seeking the guidance that might have helped her address the situation more effectively. The isolation that had once protected Lily from unwanted attention had become a liability as Madison's campaign intensified. Her lack of close relationships with other students meant there were fewer people willing or able to speak up on her behalf when incidents occurred. Noah's support was valuable, but his own low social status meant his testimony carried little weight with administrators or other students who might have been inclined to intervene. Madison's patience and strategic thinking had allowed her to build a comprehensive understanding of Lily's vulnerabilities and daily routines before launching the final phase of her campaign. She knew exactly when Lily would be at her locker each morning, understood which routes she took through the school, and had identified the times when she would be most isolated and vulnerable to direct confrontation. This intelligence gathering had taken weeks of careful observation, but it ensured that when Madison finally decided to act decisively, she would have every advantage possible. The psychological warfare had been designed to wear down Lily's confidence and leave her feeling helpless and isolated when the physical confrontation finally occurred. Madison understood that a person who had been systematically undermined over time would be less likely to fight back effectively when faced with direct assault. The campaign had been calculated to make Lily doubt her own perceptions and question whether she was overreacting to what others might dismiss as normal teenage social dynamics. Brooklyn and Hazel had played crucial supporting roles throughout this extended campaign, providing Madison with additional eyes and ears while also serving as witnesses who could corroborate whatever version of events Madison chose to present when questioned by authorities. Their involvement had been carefully managed to ensure they maintained plausible deniability while still providing essential support for Madison's increasingly aggressive tactics against their chosen target. The morning of the final confrontation had arrived with Lily already feeling emotionally depleted from weeks of sustained harassment disguised as coincidence and accident. She approached her locker with the wary exhaustion of someone who had learned to expect problems but lacked the social support or institutional protection needed to address them effectively. The stage had been perfectly set for Madison to deliver the devastating blow that would finally force Lily's two worlds to collide in ways that none of them could have anticipated. Documentation of what had actually occurred during the initial assault. The contradiction between Madison's words and her previous actions created a cognitive dissonance that only added to the psychological trauma of the physical assault, making it difficult for Lily to process the situation clearly while dealing with severe pain and the shock of being attacked in what should have been a safe educational environment. Brooklyn Walsh's voice joined Madison's in expressing concern for Lily's welfare, her comments carefully designed to reinforce the narrative that whatever had happened was accidental rather than intentional, while providing corroborating testimony that could protect all three girls from serious legal consequences if the incident attracted official attention from law enforcement or school administrators. Her positioning allowed her to block some observers' views of the ongoing interaction, while appearing to offer assistance, creating additional opportunities for Madison to maintain control over the developing situation without being observed by potential witnesses who might contradict her preferred version of events. The coordination between the two girls was so seamless that it appeared natural to casual observers, though anyone with experience in criminal behavior would recognize the sophisticated nature of their collaboration. The pain radiating from Lily's crushed fingers was unlike anything she had experienced during years of martial arts training, where controlled impacts and occasional accidents had taught her to distinguish between minor injuries and serious damage that required immediate medical attention and potentially long-term treatment. The precision of Madison's assault had targeted anatomical structures that were essential for fine motor control, representing an attack that was specifically designed to interfere with Lily's artistic abilities rather than simply causing general pain or temporary disability that would heal quickly without lasting consequences. The sophistication of the targeting suggested that Madison had researched anatomy and injury patterns to maximize the long-term impact of her assault on her victim's ability to pursue her chosen career path. Hazel Kim continued recording the scene while moving closer to capture better audio of the conversation between Madison and Lily, her smartphone documenting every word and gesture that could later be edited and manipulated to support whatever narrative Madison chose to present to authorities investigating the incident that had just occurred. The quality of modern recording equipment and her understanding of video editing techniques meant that the evidence she was creating could be altered to present any version of events that served their collective interests, including the complete removal of incriminating evidence while emphasizing material that supported their claims of innocence. The weaponization of technology that was supposed to provide objective documentation represented a new frontier in criminal deception that law enforcement and school administrators were still learning to recognize and counter. Students throughout the immediate area began converging on the scene as word spread that something significant had occurred near Locker 247, their curiosity overcoming their usual reluctance to become involved in social drama that might have negative consequences for their own social standing or physical safety within the complex hierarchy of high school social dynamics. The growing crowd created both opportunities and challenges for Madison's damage control efforts, providing more potential witnesses to her performance, while also increasing the likelihood that someone might have observed the actual assault, or might possess the knowledge and courage to contradict her emerging narrative. The attention of dozens of teenagers was now focused on the confrontation, creating the kind of audience that could make or break reputations depending on how the situation was ultimately resolved. Noah Rodriguez appeared at the edge of the growing crowd, his face immediately reflecting recognition of the serious nature of Lily's injury and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the incident that had caused damage so severe that she was clearly in significant pain. His friendship with Lily had taught him to recognize her genuine expressions of pain and distress, and what he observed was clearly the result of deliberate assault rather than accidental injury, though his lack of martial arts training prevented him from understanding the full implications of what was developing around them. His presence represented a potential threat to Madison's narrative control, as someone who knew Lily well and might be willing to contradict official explanations of what had occurred, though his own vulnerability within the school's power structure limited his ability to provide effective assistance. The scattered remains of Lily's watercolor set created a colorful crime scene across the hallway floor. Expensive pigments, mixing with dust and debris, in ways that seemed to symbolize the destruction of artistic dreams and aspirations that Madison had been deliberately targeting throughout her harassment campaign against someone whose only crime was being different. The careful organization that had characterized Lily's art supplies was replaced by chaos and waste, visual evidence of the assault that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss as accidental damage caused by normal teenage clumsiness. Students walking through the area would inevitably step on the scattered materials, grinding them further into the floor and making recovery impossible while spreading the evidence of destruction throughout the hallway. Madison's performance continued as she attempted to establish physical contact with Lily under the guise of offering assistance, her hands reaching for Lily's injured fingers while her voice maintained the tone of innocent concern that had characterized her initial response to the situation she had deliberately created through calculated violence. Her persistence in attempting to touch the injury site was consistent with predator behavior patterns that sought to maintain control over victims even after delivering initial attacks, using false sympathy as cover for continued psychological and potentially physical aggression that would prevent effective response or escape. The manipulation was sophisticated enough to convince casual observers, while being obvious to anyone trained to recognize the warning signs of continued predatory behavior. Lily's martial arts training finally overcame the shock and pain that had initially paralyzed her response systems, her body moving automatically into defensive positions that her grandmother had drilled into muscle memory through thousands of repetitions over nearly a decade of dedicated practice and discipline. The transition from victim to defender was instantaneous and unmistakable, her posture shifting from wounded prey to dangerous predator in ways that immediately changed the dynamics of the confrontation and the power relationships between all participants in the developing situation. Years of disciplined practice had prepared her for exactly this moment, though she had hoped never to need those skills in her carefully controlled school environment where she had worked so hard to maintain her peaceful invisibility. The transformation in Lily's demeanor was so dramatic and unexpected that Madison's confident expression faltered for the first time since approaching the locker, her predatory smile replaced by uncertainty as she recognized that her victim was no longer helpless or controllable through intimidation and false sympathy. The change represented a fundamental shift in the power dynamics that had governed their interaction, with Lily's hidden abilities suddenly becoming relevant to a situation that Madison had assumed she could control completely through superior social position and institutional protection that had always shielded her from consequences. The realization that she had miscalculated her target's capabilities created the first genuine fear Madison had experienced in years of successful predatory behavior. Brooklyn Walsh's commentary faltered as she observed the shift in Lily's body language, her carefully rehearsed support for Madison's narrative becoming less confident, as she realized that the situation was developing in ways that hadn't been anticipated during their planning sessions and preparation for this confrontation. The appearance of unexpected variables in what had seemed like a perfectly controlled scenario created anxiety that began to show in her voice and posture, undermining the casual confidence that had characterized her earlier performance and making it obvious to experienced observers that she was part of a coordinated effort rather than an innocent bystander. Her nervousness threatened to expose the premeditated nature of the assault, creating additional vulnerabilities for all three participants in the conspiracy. Hazel Kim's recording captured the moment when Lily's transformation became obvious to all observers, though she continued documenting the scene even as it became clear that the encounter was no longer following the script that Madison had prepared for their coordinated assault on what they had assumed would be a helpless victim. Her loyalty to Madison was absolute, but her understanding of the potential consequences for all involved made her increasingly nervous about continuing to participate in what was clearly becoming a more serious situation than originally planned, with implications that could extend far beyond typical high school disciplinary actions. The evidence she was creating might ultimately be used against her friends rather than protecting them, creating a dilemma that she was not prepared to handle. The growing crowd of student observers sensed the shift in energy that accompanied Lily's transformation from victim to potential threat, their conversations quieting as they recognized that they might be about to witness something unprecedented in the usually predictable social dynamics of Riverside Valley High School, where Madison's dominance had never been seriously challenged. The attention of dozens of teenagers was now focused entirely on the confrontation near Locker 247, creating the kind of audience that could make or break reputations depending on what occurred in the next few moments and how the balance of power shifted between the participants. The collective anticipation was palpable, with students instinctively recognizing that they were witnessing a potential turning point in their school's social hierarchy. Madison's attempt to maintain physical contact with Lily's injured hand was suddenly met with resistance that she had never encountered from any of her previous victims. A controlled but unmistakable demonstration of defensive capability that suggested serious martial arts training of the kind that required years of dedicated practice and discipline. The precision and effectiveness of Lily's movement to block Madison's approach was executed with technical perfection that revealed abilities Madison had never suspected and couldn't have prepared for during her planning, fundamentally altering the strategic landscape of their confrontation. The realization that her victim possessed sophisticated defensive skills created a level of uncertainty that Madison had never experienced in her previous campaigns against vulnerable targets. The revelation that quiet, artistic Lily Chen possessed sophisticated fighting skills created a collective intake of breath from the surrounding students, their understanding of the school's social hierarchy suddenly requiring fundamental revision as they processed this unexpected development that challenged everything they thought they knew about both girls and their respective capabilities. The student they had dismissed as insignificant and powerless was demonstrating capabilities that suggested she had been deliberately concealing her true nature, rather than lacking the ability to defend herself against harassment and assault from more socially prominent classmates. The implications of this revelation extended far beyond the immediate confrontation, suggesting that other assumptions about social power and vulnerability might also be incorrect. Madison's voice rose in pitch as she realized that her carefully planned assault had awakened something dangerous in her intended victim, her false concern becoming genuine alarm, as she understood that the situation was spiraling beyond her control in ways that could have serious consequences for her social status, her legal standing, and potentially her physical safety. The confidence that had characterized her approach to the confrontation was rapidly being replaced by the kind of fear that she typically inflicted on others, creating a role reversal that she was completely unprepared to handle effectively, given her lack of experience with genuine resistance or consequences. The psychological impact of losing control was as devastating to Madison as the physical assault had been to Lily. Striking at the core of her identity as someone who always dominated others, Lily's injured hand continued to throb with severe pain, but her grandmother's training had taught her to function effectively even when injured, using controlled breathing techniques and mental discipline to manage discomfort, while maintaining full combat readiness and tactical awareness of her environment and potential threats. The assault on her fingers had been designed to disable her artistic abilities, but Madison had failed to consider that those same fine motor skills were essential components of martial arts training that had been specifically developed to function even under adverse conditions including injury, fatigue, and psychological pressure. The irony that attacking her artistic capabilities had revealed her fighting skills was not lost on Lily, though she remained focused on the immediate tactical situation rather than long-term implications. The scattered art supplies created additional hazards in the confined space near the lockers, with expensive pigments and broken containers creating slippery surfaces that could affect footing during any physical confrontation that might develop from the current standoff between the two girls. Lily's awareness of her environment included automatic assessment of these obstacles, her trained mind calculating how they might be used defensively or overcome if the situation required rapid movement or complex defensive maneuvers that utilized the available space effectively. The environmental factors that Madison had created through her destruction of the art supplies were now working against her, creating tactical disadvantages that could be exploited by someone with superior training and situational awareness. Noah Rodriguez began pushing through the crowd of observers, his protective instincts activated by the sight of his friend's injury, and his recognition of the escalating nature of the confrontation that was developing between Lily and Madison in ways that suggested potential violence. His approach represented potential reinforcement for Lily's position, though his lack of martial arts training meant he could become a liability if the situation developed into serious physical conflict that required sophisticated defensive responses and tactical coordination. His loyalty and courage were unquestionable, but his presence added complexity to Lily's tactical calculations about how to resolve the confrontation safely while protecting both herself and her friend from the consequences of Madison's aggression. Brooklyn Welsh's position near the lockers gave her an excellent view of Lily's transformation from victim to defender, and her expression reflected growing concern about the potential consequences of Madison's assault, now that it was clear their victim possessed unexpected capabilities that could dramatically alter the outcome of any continued confrontation. Her understanding of legal and social implications was sophisticated enough to recognize that assault charges against someone with martial arts training carried different weight than similar charges involving typical high school students, potentially elevating the incident from a school disciplinary matter to serious criminal charges. The realization that they had attacked someone who could defend herself effectively created new categories of risk that hadn't been considered during their planning process. Hazel Kim's recording continued. Despite her growing nervousness about the developing situation, her loyalty to Madison competing with her instinct for self-preservation, as she realized that the evidence she was creating might ultimately be used against her friends rather than protecting them from consequences of their coordinated assault. The smartphone in her hands captured every moment of the confrontation, creating permanent documentation that could be analyzed and reanalyzed by authorities investigating what was clearly becoming a serious incident with potential criminal implications that extended far beyond typical teenage social drama. The irony that her efforts to protect Madison through selective recording might actually provide evidence of their guilt was becoming apparent as the situation developed in unexpected directions. Madison's second attempt to grab Lily's injured hand was met with a defensive movement so fast and precise that most observers missed the technical details of what occurred, seeing only that Madison's aggressive gesture was somehow deflected and redirected in ways that left her off balance and vulnerable to counterattack if Lily chose to escalate the confrontation further. The demonstration of superior speed and technique was executed with the kind of control that prevented serious injury to Madison, while making it clear that much more devastating responses were available if the situation continued to escalate beyond verbal confrontation and into serious physical violence. The restraint that Lily demonstrated was as impressive as her technical skill, suggesting not only training but wisdom in the application of her abilities. The crowd of student observers erupted in surprised murmurs and exclamations as they processed what they had just witnessed, their understanding of both girls being fundamentally altered by the revelation of Lily's hidden abilities and Madison's vulnerability when faced with genuine resistance rather than helpless victims who could be intimidated and assaulted without consequence. The social dynamics that had governed Riverside Valley High for years were being challenged in real time, with consequences that would ripple through the entire student body regardless of how the immediate confrontation was ultimately resolved through violence or de-escalation. The shift in power dynamics was so dramatic that students who had never paid attention to either girl were now completely focused on the outcome of their confrontation. Lily's voice cut through the noise of student reaction with the kind of calm authority that her grandmother had taught her to project during confrontational situations, her tone carrying none of the fear or uncertainty that Madison had expected to hear from her victim after inflicting serious injury and psychological trauma. The words she spoke were carefully chosen to establish clear boundaries, while offering Madison an opportunity to withdraw from the confrontation before it escalated to levels that would have serious consequences for everyone involved, particularly Madison herself, who was clearly unprepared for genuine resistance. The professional quality of her voice control and the authority it projected created additional shock among observers who had never heard Lily speak with such confidence and command. "Step away from me, Madison," Lily said clearly, her voice carrying enough volume to be heard by all nearby observers, while maintaining the controlled tone that indicated serious martial arts training and the mental discipline required to remain calm under extreme pressure and physical pain. The statement was both warning and invitation, giving Madison the opportunity to end the confrontation gracefully, while making it clear that continued aggression would be met with increasingly serious defensive responses that could result in significant injury to someone who had never faced genuine consequences for her predatory behavior. The phrasing was legally precise, establishing clear verbal warnings that could be referenced if subsequent investigation required documentation of attempts to avoid physical conflict. Madison's face flushed with embarrassment and anger as she realized that her public assault on Lily had backfired spectacularly, transforming her from predator to potential victim in front of dozens of witnesses who would spread the story throughout the school within hours, through social media and personal communication networks that connected every corner of the student population. Her reputation for being untouchable and dangerous was being undermined by her inability to intimidate someone she had assumed would be helpless against her attack, creating a kind of public humiliation that she had previously inflicted on others with impunity, while enjoying complete protection from consequences. The role reversal was so complete and unexpected that she struggled to process what was happening to her carefully constructed image of dominance and control. The transformation of the social dynamics surrounding the confrontation was becoming obvious to even casual observers, with students who had initially gathered to witness Madison's latest victim instead finding themselves watching their previously untouchable queen face genuine resistance for the first time in her high school career. The shift represented more than just a single confrontation between two students. It was a fundamental challenge to the power structure that had governed social relationships at Riverside Valley High for years, with implications that would extend far beyond the immediate participants and affect the entire school culture. The realization that Madison could be successfully resisted created possibilities that had never been considered by students who had accepted her dominance as an unchangeable fact of their educational environment. Brooklyn Walsh attempted to provide support for Madison by moving closer and offering verbal encouragement, but her words lacked conviction as she observed the clear evidence of Lily's superior defensive capabilities and Madison's growing desperation as her carefully planned assault crumbled into public humiliation. Her loyalty to Madison was being tested by the recognition that continued involvement in the confrontation could have serious negative consequences for her own social standing and legal liability, particularly if the situation escalated to violence that resulted in serious injury to either participant. The calculation of personal risk versus group loyalty was becoming increasingly complex as the situation developed in directions that threatened all of their carefully constructed social positions. The scattered art supplies on the floor served as a constant reminder of the deliberate nature of Madison's assault, their colorful destruction providing visual evidence that whatever had occurred was intentional rather than accidental, as Madison was attempting to claim. The expensive pigments that had been carefully saved for and lovingly maintained were now ground into the institutional flooring, representing not just financial loss but symbolic destruction of artistic dreams and aspirations that Madison had specifically targeted in her campaign of harassment. The evidence of deliberate destruction would be difficult to explain away as accidental damage, creating additional legal vulnerabilities for Madison and her accomplices if the incident attracted official investigation. Hazel Kim's continued recording was creating a permanent record of the confrontation's development, though her selective framing and editing plans meant that the evidence would be manipulated to support predetermined narratives rather than accurately documenting the criminal behavior that had initiated the entire incident. The sophistication of modern video editing technology made it possible to create convincing false evidence that could deceive investigators and authority figures who relied on digital documentation to understand complex situations involving multiple participants and conflicting accounts. The weaponization of evidence creation represented a new challenge for law enforcement and school administrators who were still learning to recognize and counter sophisticated manipulation of digital media. The growing tension in the hallway was palpable. As more students became aware of the confrontation and began converging on the scene, their collective attention creating pressure that would make it difficult for any participant to simply walk away without losing significant social standing. The audience effect was intensifying the stakes for everyone involved, particularly Madison, whose reputation for dominance was being publicly challenged in ways that would have lasting consequences regardless of how the immediate situation resolved. The social pressure created by dozens of observers was transforming a personal confrontation into a public spectacle with implications that extended far beyond the original participants. Madison's desperation was becoming increasingly obvious as she realized that her usual tactics of intimidation and false sympathy were proving ineffective against someone who possessed both the skills and the confidence to resist her aggression effectively. Her attempts to maintain control of the situation were becoming more frantic and less sophisticated, as the pressure of public observation and unexpected resistance combined to undermine her usual tactical advantages. The psychological impact of losing control in front of so many witnesses was as devastating to her sense of identity as the physical assault had been to Lily, creating a kind of role reversal that she had never experienced and was unprepared to handle. The possibility of genuine physical confrontation was increasing as Madison's desperation grew, and her options for maintaining face while withdrawing from the situation diminished with each passing moment of public observation. Her pride and reputation were at stake in ways that made rational calculation of risk versus benefit increasingly difficult, while her lack of experience with genuine resistance meant she had no effective strategies for de-escalation that wouldn't result in humiliating loss of social status. The combination of personal investment in the outcome and lack of effective alternatives was creating a dangerous psychological state that could lead to increasingly reckless behavior. Lily's defensive posture remained calm but ready, as she assessed the evolving situation and calculated the probability of additional violence from someone who was clearly becoming more desperate and unpredictable, as her plans crumbled and her reputation suffered public damage. Her training had taught her to recognize the warning signs that preceded escalation from verbal to physical confrontation, and Madison's body language was displaying classic indicators of someone preparing for a desperate attack that might be more dangerous, precisely because it would be driven by emotion rather than tactical calculation. The need to remain prepared for sudden escalation while avoiding actions that might trigger unnecessary violence required constant attention to subtle environmental and behavioral cues. The hallway had effectively become an arena where social hierarchies and personal capabilities were being tested in ways that would have lasting implications for everyone involved, transforming a routine school day into a defining moment that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. The confrontation between Madison and Lily represented larger themes of power, justice, and the consequences of systematic harassment that resonated with many students who had their own experiences with bullying and intimidation. The symbolic importance of the moment was not lost on observers who recognized that they were witnessing a potential turning point in their school's culture and social dynamics. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.